I notice that Senator Patterson referred to the Albanese government's multiple failures to protect Australia and keep Australians safe, including their abandonment of sovereign borders, etc. He has discussed sovereign borders. I want to come to the core element of keeping Australians safe, which is defence. Now, those opposite have talked a lot about facts and have cast aspersions that the coalition is merely playing politics and seeking to raise fear. But I have quoted previously independent commentators who are expert in their field, and I've referred before to Mr Greg Sheridan, who is undoubtedly one of Australia's preeminent foreign affairs and defence journalists, who is also critical of the Albanese government in terms of national security. Now, to be fair, he's also been critical of my side of politics in the past, and I've acknowledged that before. But to the point that Senator Patterson raises, it's worth looking and quoting from a recent article by Mr Sheridan. And I quote, "The Albanese government is coming apart in foreign policy, national security and defence. It has become incoherent and indecipherable. It consistently tries to hide basic information, can't maintain cabinet unity or policy consistency. Its ministers frequently contradict each other and often seem to have no idea what they're talking about." End quote. Now, what that says is that in this most fundamental thing of national security, all the promises that were made before the last election are not actually being carried through by action. In fact, Mr Sheridan talks about that, and I quote, "The government started well off on security issues generally, and Mr Albanese made strong, substantial speeches in opposition, but now it looks as though those were purely designed to neutralise national security as an election issue." End quote. What we see is that the government speaks a big game, and the Defence Strategic Review is one of those. It was all about meeting the urgent requirements. And yet what's happened? 12 months before the Defence Strategic Review was released, that's actually led to a range of cost shifting within defence. The budget that has followed has actually seen a $1.5 billion decrease in defence funding. And this is not just criticism coming from the opposition. People like Mr Brent Clark, who heads up Australia's industry defence network, has said that the DSR has come out, which was a review. Now, there's going to be a further review. We've wasted time. The government has taken us a year to tell us that they are going to do another review, and this has significant implications for defence industry. In other words, industry sat idle for 12 months. End quote. And so what we see is that the government speaks a big game, but then doesn't follow through with meaningful actions that are actually delivering outcomes on the ground. And even this week, we tabled a report in this place about an inquiry that the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee had done into the proposal for a Defence Capability Assurance Bill, which I had lodged in the Senate, and all of the evidence provided by experts, some of whom worked within defence, many of whom worked within defence industry, some worked in academia, across large industry, small to medium-sized companies, deep expertise, drawing on ANAO reports and others, so completely independent of the coalition, were critical of the approach to assessing risk. And yet what has the government done? They've said, we're not going to actually accept the change that's required. We'll stick with the internal reform that Defence is promising they can achieve, even though the evidence highlighted that Defence has failed to make that reform and consistently drive better outcomes over the last 20 years, even after 3 quite significant reports. On this last point, though, to the point of the concern around anti-Semitism within the community, yes, the coalition has been critical of some of the actions of the government, but that's not us purely seeking to politicise the event. It's not us. Independent commentators, and again I go back to Mr Sheridan, in the same article I quote, "The government's biggest moral failing has been its response to the Israel-Hamas war." End quote. And we do see deep fear amongst many in Australia's Jewish community because of the rise of anti-Semitic behaviour and the threat of violence. All Australians deserve to feel safe, not just our Jewish community, but all Australians deserve to know they have a government that will put Australia's security first.